When you hear the term growing up, what does that entail? Games of hide and seek with your neighborhood friends? Not worrying about bills? Getting to know the world around you? Learning about yourself and the people in it? With a never-ending montage of cartoons, boy bands, pop idols, sports, and video games in the background? Does it also include choosing to vote in your first election, going to your first club, signing your first apartment lease, or calculating your first obligation as an American taxpayer? It should. Your brain doesn't stop maturing until your mid to late 20s. So for that very reason, it's time to talk about children, teens, and young adults of the 90s. We'll discuss the early years of millennials like me, born between the early 80s to mid 90s, but also pay special attention to the second half of Generation X, the adolescents and young adults who were born between 1974 and 1980. Their maturation process was both disturbed and enhanced by all of the events, trends, and attitudes we've discussed so far in this series. So now, in the 4th episode of Lectual Does the 90s, it's time for a deep dive on the media, trends, subcultures, and news that shaped and reflected millennials and Generation X, for better and for worse.
Trench coat mafia, you know, it kind of is like, now we're infamous, we have a reputation, you know.
What the rock is cooking!
I'd rather see us, partying instead of gangbanging and shooting somebody else.
Worst parts about being an adult paying bills, especially with the crushing cost of living, being able to see where your money is going can make it easier to manage bills and save, which brings me to this video's sponsor, Rocket Money. Y'all, this is no joke. I'm dead ass. I've been using Rocket Money before they reached out to me about a sponsorship. So when they did, I was like, oh my God, I'm destined to tell them about this amazing personal finance app. You can use it to manage your subscriptions, budget, and optimize your savings all in one place. My favorite feature is canceling subscriptions. Random recurring $5.99 charge I forgot about, gone. Dual music service subscriptions I forgot I had under 2 emails, fixed. The app is very easy to use. Rocket Money has helped save its customers like me up to $740 a year, with over 500 million in canceled subscriptions. To save more and spend less, go to rocketmoney.com/intellectual and download the app for free, joining 5 million members using the all-in-one finance platform to make adulting a little easier. Now, let's get into the history.
My Frank. He likes to wash his car the old-fashioned way. He says the old way is the best. If he knew I was using Moviefone, he'd have a fit. Moviefone is the easy way to find out what movies are playing, where, and when. It's so utterly modern. But don't tell Frank.
The best movies were made in the 90s. I don't make the rules. They were bright and well lit, the sound mixing was great, and the sets were actually sets. By 1993, there were over 3,400 Blockbuster stores in the US, and kids and teens had their pick of films to choose from, especially because the largest movie-going group were the 16 to 24 crowd. If you wanted your sports fill, there was Cool Runnings, Angels in the Outfield, Little Giants, The Mighty Ducks, Space Jam, and the still amazing The Sandlot.
Forever. Forever. Forever.
How many of us watched Newsies in elementary or middle school history class? There were a bunch of talking animals and inanimate objects, from Babe to Stuart Little, to the competing Ants in A Bug's Life, to George of the Jungle, to Toy Story, which was the first ever computer animation feature film. The movie would make over $350 million worldwide, surprising critics and executives, along with inspiring computer and animation technology. Disney was also releasing films like The Parent Trap, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Pocahontas, Hercules, and Mulan. Youth of the 90s recalled being enthralled by comedy star Robin Williams and everything from Mrs. Doubtfire to Hook to Flubber to Jumanji, my personal favorite, and Aladdin. Williams refused to allow Disney to advertise merchandise featuring Genie, and when they broke this promise, he refused to record an Aladdin sequel.
I'll be the victim all your life.
The Addams Family movies, Halloween Town and Hocus Pocus, became Halloween time classics for the entire family.
Bless you.
For more frightening experiences, there was Disturbing Behavior, The Craft, The Faculty, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Blade.
I came back to finish you off.
Get out of my way, you freak!
Blade became Marvel's first successful film and set the foundation for its future comic book adaptations.
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Two horror movies that changed the trajectory of film were Scream and The Blair Witch Project.
Oh no. Tell that to Cotton Weary. You wouldn't believe how easy he was to frame. Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
When people saw the poster for 1996's Scream, they assumed Drew Barrymore was the star of the film, so her near-immediate death at the beginning of the movie was game-changing. The movie's satire of slasher films, which had gone critically stale in the 80s and the first half of the 90s, was well-received, plus the twist ending. Though releasing at Christmas time with low expectations of box office success in 1996, the film eventually earned $173 million worldwide. The ghost face mask would become iconic. You can learn more about Scream, along with 1990s serial killer culture, in this video on the Intellectual Quickies channel. As for 1999's The Blair Witch Project, the found footage concept and creepy internet marketing, like hiring unknown actors and listing them as missing/deceased, was a sensation.
I'm so scared.
The movie made $248.6 million against a budget of less than $1 million.
What the fuck are you doing? Exactly what you taught me. I taught you to disrespect us? You taught me to rule. That's right, rule, bitch, but don't forget who made you.
Teen black comedies really shined with Jawbreaker, Cruel Intentions, Election, and But I'm a Cheerleader, which involved a teenage lesbian going to conversion camp.
I'm not perverted. I get good grades, I go to church, I'm a cheerleader. I'm not like all of you. Everyone reads Cosmo. Everyone looks at other girls all the time.
There were romantic comedies like She's All That, American Pie, Can't Hardly Wait, 10 Things I Hate About You, which is a classic, Never Been Kissed, and my favorite, Clueless.
Okay, like right now, for example, the Haitians need to come to America. But some people are all, what about the strain on our resources? But it's like, when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right? I said RSVP because it was a sit-down dinner. But people came that did not RSVP. So I was totally bugging. I had to haul ass to the kitchen, redistribute the food, squish in extra place settings. But by the end of the day, it was the more the merrier. And so, if the government could just get to the kitchen, rearrange some things, we could certainly party with the Haitians. And in conclusion, may I please remind you that it does not say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty. Thank you very much.
You can get your fill of silly comedies like Superstar, Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion, and Good Burger.
Welcome to Good Burger, home of the Good Burger. Can I take your order?
There were summer blockbuster films boasting huge budgets like Independence Day, Jurassic Park, Men in Black, and the greatest of all time. Please give it up, people, for The Mummy.
Americans.
Scientific disasters abounded in Twister, Armageddon, Deep Impact, and my favorite, Deep Blue Sea.
Not going to fight anymore. We're going to pull together and we're going to find a way to get out of here. First, we're going to seal off this.
A black man survived an underwater research facility collapse, and sharks. That's Black history, baby. That is Black history. Who was getting into all these movies, many of which were rated PG-13 to R, is coming up in a bit. We'll address more movies like The Matrix as this series continues. But what was your favorite movie during this era? Make sure you tell me in the comments. When the youth weren't renting movies or headed to the theaters, there were more choices than ever before on TV, plus new regulations. The 1990 Children's Television Act limited the frequency of advertisements during children's programming and banned cross-promotion advertising during shows. And in 1996, with Clinton's support via the Telecommunications Act, that 1990 law was enhanced with a requirement that networks air a minimum of 3 hours of children's educational content a week. Some stations had kid blocks, like WB and Fox. On the WB, the Japanese import Pokemon began airing in 1999, continuing the trading card, toy, and gaming craze of Pokemania, and served as many American youth's first anime.
At Greenwood Elementary School, lunchtime is trading time, and the cards are flying.
I'll trade you this for a Gyarados. That for a Gyarados? That's crazy!
If it sounds like the kids are speaking another language, they are. The language of Pokemon. Oh, you're my best friend. Pokemon, short for Pocket Monsters, was born 4 years ago as a Japanese video game. The star is Pikachu, who does lighthearted battle with 150 other characters in the #1 TV show, the #1 video game, and most of all in the popular trading cards. But what Pikachu and his pals do just as well is sell. They will earn over $1 billion this year. Christina Levy spent $1,000 last month on Pokemon. Her kids call her Pokemom.
It's a really social game, socially interacts with all the kids in the neighborhood.
On Fox Kids, there was X-Men and the absolute fire that is Batman the Animated Series, one of my absolute favorite shows of all time.
I gotta know. Why'd you stay with me all day, risking your butt for someone who's never given you anything but trouble?
I know what it's like to try and rebuild a life. I had a bad day too, once.
Nice guys like you shouldn't have bad days.
But the real bangers were over on the Big Four. With PBS, who was holding down all the kids without cable. Barney launched in 1992, and as my mother will tell you, I loved that anthropomorphic purple dinosaur. I remember crying in elementary school when kids said they hated him. All he wanted to do was love you.
I love you, you love me, we're a happy family with a great big hug and a kiss from me to you. Won't you say you love me too?
The Magic School Bus, a classic, began airing in 1994, and Arthur dropped in 1996. Wasn't DW the most annoying little sister ever?
I told you not to touch it! You built it all wrong! Did you even read the directions? It didn't fly for 1 second. It's not my fault if you made a plane that can't fly. I told you not to touch it!
Arthur was also noted for dealing with disabilities and health issues, tackling topics like diabetes, dyslexia, asthma, autism, and more. I was also a major fan of Zoom and Zaboombafoo, but the Don Dada was Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Bill Nye the Science Guy. Bill Nye the Science Guy. Science rules. Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Inertia is a property of matter.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
T-7 seconds.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
The popular British import The Teletubbies caused controversy in 1999 when Jerry Falwell accused one of the TV characters, Tinky Winky, of being a gay role model. He cited the fact that Tinky Winky wore a bag that looked like a purse, adding, "He is purple, the gay pride color, and his antenna is shaped like a triangle, the gay pride symbol." This led to BBC stating that Tinky Winky is simply a sweet technological baby with a magic bag, and Falwell's condemnation caused a sharp rise in support of the show and its merchandise, turning Tinky Winky into a tongue-in-cheek gay icon. And don't worry, we'll be coming back to bigotry and homophobia in this series in episode 6.
All your old friends on a brand new network. Coming to cable October 1st.
Cartoon Cable Network launched in 1992, but they wouldn't start their original programming, Cartoons, until 1996, starting with Dexter's Laboratory.
I am sorry, my mentor. I have failed you.
They followed it up with edgy shows like Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, The Powerpuff Girls, and Ed, Edd and Eddy.
Alone was I with tender courage, and all his fur, his furry furage, which I say did encourage me to be quite naughty. Courage.
My favorite Cartoon Network show was Courage the Cowardly Dog, which barely made the list by debuting in November 1999.
Hey, stupid dogs, now a stupid hot dog.
It's okay. It's only acting, I think.
Oh, yes. The camera loves your nastiness.
If you weren't there, I'm sorry. Over on Nickelodeon, the iconic Nick News with Linda Ellerbee began airing in 1992. Nothing excited me more in elementary school with my little nerdy ass than when the teacher would roll out the television, cut the lights, and begin a new episode of Bill Nye or Nick News.
This is a Nickelodeon special edition, A Conversation with Magic.
Nick News educated youth and asked their opinions on issues like global warming, the Middle East, and HIV, while also being entertaining. Ellerbee's display of a condom during the Magic Johnson special was newsworthy, with an AP columnist writing, "Something happened that snapped me out of my daze and made the kids around Magic sit up a little straighter." Ellerbee produced a condom, which she removed from its package and proceeded to demonstrate.
Well, one of the best ways, Magic, is wear a condom, isn't it?
Yes, it's the safest way is to wear a condom, and I think somebody brought one here.
I have one here.
Just to show you.
This is what a condom looks like, guys and girls. It goes on the man's penis, and basically it goes on like this. You try to get the air out of the end part there. You roll it down the penis.
Also appearing on the Magic Johnson special was the child activist Hydea Broadbent, who had been diagnosed with HIV in 1987 when she was just 3 years old. Before 1991, most of Nickelodeon's animated shows were from overseas. They invested $100,000 each into Doug, Ren and Stimpy, and Rugrats.
At all? You won't tell us right now? What does Miss Carol think of her kids?
She thinks we're all little.
Oh no! That's it. Get her out. Get her out of here.
But that's what you said! But you said it, Miss Carol!
You're right. You're right. You know that? You're right. I have said it before and I will say it again. You are all little...
The success of these shows led to others. While I'm not a big Nickelodeon girl, I'll pay lip service to the travesty that was Cat Dog, the questionable SpongeBob SquarePants, and I know y'all about to come for me in the comments, so come on, give it to me. The fun Fairly Odd Parents and the pleasurable Hey Arnold.
Arnold, my love, my sultry preteen, why must I hold you only whilst I dream? Will I be forever enslaved by your spell? Why must I worship you and never ever tell? Oh, Arnold, you make my girlhood tremble.
You make my girlhood tremble? Arnold, you make my girlhood tremble?
Snick launched in 1992 too, airing on Saturday nights for 2 hours, featuring preteen and teenager targeted shows like Roundhouse, Clarissa Explains It All, Are You Afraid of the Dark, The Amanda Show, and the extremely diverse and iconic All That, which led to Kenan and Kel.
Kel loves orange soda. Is it true? Is it true? Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, it's true. Ooh. I do. Ooh.
Many of these shows were produced by Dan Schneider, who along with other set employees would later be accused of sexual assault and harassment that began during this era. During the first half of the 90s, the Disney Channel became available in basic cable plans instead of premium ones. Wanting to cash in on the adolescent TV boom, in 1997 the channel redirected its programming to youngsters, particularly girls, between the ages of 7 and 17. They started cranking out movie classics like Brink, Smart House, directed by LeVar Burton, and Xenon, Girl of the 21st Century.
Make my heart go, my supernova girl. Make my heart go, my supernova girl.
As far as serial programming, there was the famous Jet Jackson, and animated shows featuring movie characters like Hercules and Timon and Pumbaa. But the good stuff wouldn't come until later. Thankfully, Bruce W. Smith, director of 1992's Bebe's Kids, was already hard at work on The Proud Family in 1998. When you weren't catching the big three in kids' cable TV, you may have been tuning into the Monday Night War.
Wait, Lex, hold on. Is that it for cartoons? I know that's not it.
Who the fuck? Hello? I know that's not who I think it is.
It's who you think it is.
Tariq? The Toonrific?
I've decided to take a break from my busy schedule of overanalyzing side characters in Family Guy to well actually you about cartoons that I was barely alive to see.
I'm not mad at it. I watch your videos all the time.
Oh my god, I'm so sorry.
So, I'm missing cartoons? Well damn, tell me what I'm missing in so they don't drag me.
The 90s is one of the most important decades in the history of the medium, I'd say. Television was practically having a renaissance. Those 3 original Nicktoons you named really helped push this new age of creator-driven cartoons. On the youth-oriented side, the cultural significance of Rugrats cannot be overstated. When the show took the leap to theaters in 1998, it was the first non-Disney animated film to gross over $100 million. 14 years, 2 movies, 2 spin-offs, and a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame later, these babies were rock stars. And there's Tiny Toons, right? Steven Spielberg, in an effort to bring back the style of cartoons that he grew up with as a kid, produced Tom Ruger's Tiny Toon Adventures, featuring some kids who went to a school taught by the Looney Tunes characters. Spielberg and Ruger went on to create Animaniacs, its spin-off Pinky and the Brain, its spin-off Pinky Elmira and the Brain, and Freakazoid. In 1997, it was Disney's One Saturday Morning. That's Pepper Ann, The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and Recess. And as for adult animation, before the 90s, the last attempt at a primetime animated show was 1972's Wait Till Your Father Gets Home. The Simpsons broke that mold in 1989, becoming relentlessly successful. This led to a new wave of adult animation that we're still feeling the effects of today. Like Family Guy, King of the Hill, Futurama, they may have all faced some kind of like cancellation, but all 3 are currently in production right now, because we just can't let anything go. Also, MTV lucked up with Beavis and Butthead and its spin-off, Daria, which people have been begging me to do a video on since Prince died.
Yeah, I'm actually waiting for that one too.
Shit, so you're gonna talk about Southpark, right?
Oh yeah, don't worry.
Okay, so let me just say one last thing about the 90s. 1999 had the wildest roster. So many long-running, culturally significant shows. Family Guy, SpongeBob, Ed, Edd n Eddy, Courage, Home Movies, Lil Bill, Fox's Futurama, the cartoon that just won't die no matter how many bullets you use. And just for the hell of it, here's my top 10 from this era. Spoiler alert, there's a lot from 99. 10, Animaniacs. 9, Rugrats. 8, Home Movies. 7, Recess. 6, Southpark. 5, Family Guy. Damn, that's low-key kind of messy, because they def be beefing. 4, Futurama. 3, Ed, Edd n Eddy. 2, Hey Arnold. And number 1, King of the Hill.
No Simpsons on the list and King of the Hill at number 1? That's what I call taste.
Right, yeah, and it was totally not because I was being anal about the fact that the first episode came out in 1989. Yeah, no way. Oh, and I guess anime was airing around this time too. I don't know, I don't watch it. Vegeta, I guess.
Oh, they might drag you in the comments.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Wow, that was a lot of information. Thank you for this, seriously. I can't believe I forgot to mention how big the Rugrats movie was. And I forgot Recess.
That's why I'm here. Now, I gotta go run to work on this video about cartoon theatrical movies. But if you would like to hear someone do deep cartoon analysis while at the same time calling Charlie Brown the N-word, you can head on over to my channel, Toonrific Tariq. Lex, this was great. Thanks for having me. Alright, that's it. You can have your channel back now.
When you weren't catching the big three in kids' cable TV, you may have been tuning into the Monday Night Wars and the increasingly edgy antics of professional wrestling. The top two competitors for your attention were World Championship Wrestling, headed by Ted Turner, versus World Wrestling Entertainment, helmed by the extremely bizarre Vince McMahon. WWE set itself apart with the Attitude Era beginning in 1997, and we all had our favorites. Chyna, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock. In 1999, UPN began airing WWE's Friday Night SmackDown, and behind the scenes of the explicit storylines and showmanship was a rampant culture of abuse, drugs, and sexual assault/harassment. The wrestling craze led to merch like apparel and toys. Toys. Do you remember all those infomercials that aired in between your favorite shows? Elastic plastic balloons, blow pins, rainbow art, Digidraw, plus those zoo books I begged my Nana for. You can learn about more famous toys in a 90s history of Christmas, but we're going to focus on the arrival of better video game consoles and computers, which provided a new means for entertainment. I'm talking computer solitaire, which became available in 1990. SimCity, one of my favorites, Sid Meier's Civilization, Age of Empire, Warcraft, Roller Coaster Tycoon, the Putt-Putt games, Tomb Raider, Fallout, Doom, Mortal Kombat, and more. Don't worry, we'll come back to video games later in this episode. For now, let's turn our attention to the computer. Many families had computer rooms rather than everyone having their own device, meaning internet access was not always guaranteed for youngsters. You literally signed in and out of the digital third space if you had access to it in the first place. For the super young, there was Yahooligans, the oldest kids' internet portal. It racked up nearly 500,000 viewers a month by 1999, with kid-friendly news, trivia, and games. For the older crowd, in chat rooms like Yahoo Chat, which launched in 1997, you could communicate with super niche groups of people from around the world with little to no moderation. From stressed out mothers, to LGBT youth, to goth youth, to conspiracy theorists unpacking X-Files episodes, to evangelical youth questioning abstinence, plus troublesome groups like pedophiles. Slowly but surely, the anonymous and unmonitored interactions between youth and adults would become a more important concern as cybercrime awareness grew. Wired magazine reported that these online spaces were rich with hackers who were exploiting software flaws and stealing user data. The term phishing came into use on January 2nd, 1996. Still, the World Wide Web was a fun and often informative place to be. On Yahoo Chat, there were over 100 chat events each month by 1998, featuring live event coverage of tragedies like Columbine. AOL launched instant messaging in 1997 and would be followed by Yahoo Messenger and Microsoft's MSN Messenger. But AIM apparently was more popular, thanks to the ability to set a custom away message.
At any given time, 35 million Americans can sign on to the net, and according to experts, 150,000 of them are addicts.
You've got mail.
The average user logs on 7 hours a week, but for some, surfing the net can be habit-forming.
The computer, for me, is like alcohol for an alcoholic. Alcohol makes them feel that they can be somebody they're not. More friendly, more outgoing, more vivacious. I get quite a bit of mail.
In chat rooms throughout cyberspace, it's cozy and very...
Despite fears of internet addiction, most people were not hooked up to the internet 24/7. When 90s youth were away from their home computers and internet, where were they going? When possible, recreation centers, libraries, and parks, which hosted trading card events for popular games like Pokemon, hobby and skill classes, sports tournaments, and more. But increasingly, teens needed a little bit of money to meet in third spaces designated for them. The mall and skating rinks continued to be popular, plus the rise in teen through young adult-friendly cafes, smoothie shops, and clubs. After 2 decades of devolution that deprioritized public parks, libraries, and recreation centers. Parents wanted a safe place for their kids to be, and they were willing to pay for play to allay their fears. Welcome to the bold new world of pay for play, coming soon to a shopping center near you, declared the Washington Post in 1994 when describing the popularity of places like Discovery Zone, a 1989 invention that babysat kids for 2 hours if parents paid the $6 admission price. 5 years later, the company was booming. The new Discovery Zone was planned as something as a Taj Mahal. It has a micro zone for babies as young as 6 months, a huge eating area where children can munch on dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets, 4 rooms where birthday parties are held every 45 minutes, and the latest PlayStation, such as a jungle gym made out of bungee cords. Parents who are willing to pay are outfitted with beepers that let them leave for a few hours, perhaps to catch a movie across the hall, or to be pampered at a day spa set to open next door. In their absence, their children wear wristband sensors, just like the kind used in maternity wards to prevent kidnappings. Speaking of kidnappings, they were a real parental anxiety. 800,000 children were reported missing a year by 1995. The 1993 kidnapping of 12-year-old Polly Klaas from a sleepover led to her father establishing an organization in her name, which has been an advocate for missing children. California also passed its 3 Strikes Act as a result. The 1994 rape and murder of 7-year-old Megan Conca in New Jersey by a man with 2 previous sex convictions led to the creation of Megan's Law, a rider in the 1994 crime bill for a sex offender registry. Other crimes discussed in this series, like John Benet Ramsey, and non-stop contemporary media coverage of them, made parents more willing to spend money for safe spaces. Explained the Post. In an era when 12-year-old girls are murdered after being snatched from their slumber parties, pop music superstars are accused of abusing their popularity in adolescent boys, and kids are taught that a classmate's bloody nose could kill them if it contains the AIDS virus, it is no wonder the Discovery Zone appeals to anxiety-ridden parents. Said a smug Discovery Zone franchisee, "One thing that cracks me up is some people think we have $1 million playground as a public service and not as a business." Interestingly, Discovery Zone would need to compete with other paid third spaces and the internet, and it wouldn't do well. The company was bankrupt and liquidated by 2001. More than ever before in the 1990s, kids were playing organized sports, and it was a competitive and increasingly expensive arena, requiring dozens of games a year, traveling on the weekend and sometimes holidays, and working your way to the top of interstate sports leagues. Reported Time magazine in 1999, the number of kids playing basketball now tops 12 million, not to mention the nearly 7 million playing soccer, or the 5 million playing baseball. Hockey, originally played on frozen ponds, is now a year-round sport involving more than 500,000 kids from Maine down through the Sun Belt. Sports could mean scholarships, opportunities, or even a professional career. Continued Time. The old childhood ideal of goofing off, what the grimmer parenting books term non-structured play, isn't an option. As the kids get older, the more talented rise to ever more selective teams, perhaps representing an entire county, while their less gifted or less committed teammates drop away. Family holidays, including Christmas and Thanksgiving, dissolve into long treks to tournaments. Recruiters were also scouting promising players at younger ages. Sports were positive for a bunch of reasons. For girls who had faced obstacles in the 70s and 80s to have their own teams with substantial financial backing, their athletic skills were now being nurtured and taken seriously, boosting confidence and self-esteem. Organized sports also kept kids out of trouble, away from the lure of gangs and drugs. It could teach responsibility and limit their time in front of the TV. Or as one woman told the Washington Post, "You want to talk about teen pregnancies? The latchkey hours are when they're conceived. Sports helps build structure into the time you're not with your children. It keeps them in the presence of adults. That's how we replace those adult eyes we grew up with." Sports, with all the physical activity, motivated healthy lifestyles, and studies even mention that participation in team sports can improve grades. But sports also meant more creeps in charge of children. There were millions of injuries a year. There were burnout kids. Arguments raged over whether or not winners in Little League competitions deserved trophies, at the risk that it would hurt losing teams' feelings. In Massachusetts in 1996, the Youth Soccer Association banned trophies in competitions for kids under 10 years old, in case they hurt somebody's feelings, which pissed off families and coaches, who claimed kids became less interested in playing as a result. Kids Kids' sports could also strain finances because competing was extremely expensive, with gymnastics and hockey being the costliest. Poor kids were often left out, or their talent wasn't nurtured in the same way. Plus, sports scholarships, which many parents were hoping and grooming their kids for, were often long shots. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, fewer than 1% of the kids participating in organized sports in 1999 would ever qualify for a college athletic scholarship. This brings me to some key aspects driving this new child sports industry: desegregation, diversification, and affirmative action. A white parent with a mediocre child's worst fears as the cost of college grew higher and higher. It's no wonder the soccer mom stereotype, a caffeinated, high-spirited, minivan-driving, snack-toting warrior who wanted her kid to succeed on the field or on the court, thrived. Let's start with backlash to affirmative action, impacting every level of education. In 1992, a white woman and single mother named Cheryl J. Hopwood was rejected from the University of Texas School of Law. She and 3 white men sued because they had been denied entry. They had higher LSAT scores and grades than 36 out of 43 of the admitted Latinos and 16 out of 18 of the admitted black people. A Texas law professor said black and Mexican students weren't academically competitive with white ones. While the first judge upheld affirmative action on appeal in 1996, it was struck down. Because of jurisdiction, Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi public schools were banned from using race as an admission factor. A replacement was provided for minority Texans via House Bill 588, or the Texas 10% rule. It guaranteed that students who graduated in the top 10% of their high schools would get automatic admission to state schools. Analysis has shown it's done little to boost access for black and Latino students because of the cost of admission. Hopwood Vs. Texas was followed by California's Proposition 209 in 1996.
On one side, there are people like these college students who oppose Proposition 209, the measure that would end affirmative action in California. Professor Gabrielle Foreman was among the protesters.
It's clear that I wouldn't be a professor at this school without affirmative action in this specific position.
On the other side, people like San Diego contractor Michael Cornelius, who says affirmative action is unfair. He counts the damage from lost jobs.
Over the past 5 years, I've probably lost 15 to 20 contracts.
Contracts, he said, went to minority firms instead, a loss of $25 million for Cornelius. Proposition 209 would end all race and gender considerations in public education, government contracts, and hiring. Pat Ewing leads the opposition.
This will just devastate and gut all the laws necessary to have equal opportunity in the state of California for everyone.
Ward Connerly, with backing from the Republican Party, is point man in the campaign to end affirmative action.
When you give a preference to one American because of the color of his or her skin, or because of their national ancestry, that is discrimination.
The problem was racial quotas.
It is a war of emotion, with both sides saturating the airwaves. $3 million spent to persuade the 1 in 10 voters who remain undecided. Persuade them how to define fairness.
Don't be fooled.
Just days ago, the respected field poll showed voters in California were evenly split over Proposition 209. But today, their latest polling shows a jump of nearly 15% in favor of voters wanting to end affirmative action.
Anti-affirmative action activists propose the state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public employment, public education, or public contracting. 55% of California voters approved Prop 209. In the aftermath, the enrollment of black Americans to California's public universities plunged from 4.3% in 1994 to 3.8% in 1997, and hovered around 2 to 3% for at least another decade. While Prop 209 would be challenged multiple times, it remained codified. The competition for college spots meant more aggressive training for sports scholarships and/or earlier intellectual prep. The world of SATs was cutthroat. In 1992, Rolling Stone detailed a cheating ring in which students paid thousands to have test answers smuggled into their testing sites via erasers. A 1993 study of SAT scores for students at 32 private colleges generated discourse about the bias in SAT testing. The same year, it was reported that 112 universities, including the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, didn't require SAT testing. wrote the magazine when pointing out the costly preparation involved to master the exam. Average SAT scores rise steadily with wealth, from 768 among students whose families have incomes of less than $10,000 to 997 for students whose families have incomes of $70,000 or more. By 1998, SAT prep was a $200 million market, including books, CD-ROMs, personal tutoring, online help, and weekend classes. The costly test prep was often available to whites with disposable income and time to master the test outside of school. Observers also pointed out biased metaphors in the verbal section. Still, standardized testing was the norm, including the ACT, which became more popular as the decade continued. Prepping for higher academia in middle and high school wasn't enough for parents who wanted their children to excel. There were growing programs for kids as young as babies, like the extremely popular Baby Einstein Company, which debuted in 1996. It was created by a former teacher and stay-at-home mom named Julie Clark and her husband. They spent $15,000 producing a VHS tape that would expose millions of babies and infants to different languages, poetry, classical music, and basic spatial awareness. Baby Einstein became a multi-million-dollar franchise. Underneath all the supplements for a youth's education was their foundational education, which was by no means equitable. Minority schools continued to be underfunded and understaffed, and were growing in number. While the efforts to desegregate American schools have been in full swing since Brown versus Board of Education, they peaked in 1988. By the late 90s, 70% of black K-12 students attended predominantly minority schools, compared with 66% between 1991 and 1992, and 63% in 1980 and 1981. Latino students were segregated from white students at an even higher rate than black ones, and much of this was due to population changes. For instance, in Gwinnett County, Georgia, white enrollment barely changed, but the enrollment of black, Latino, and Asian students more than doubled. In my hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina in 1996, a white 6-year-old wasn't selected in the lottery for the prestigious Old Providence Elementary School, which was required to have a makeup of 60% white students and 40% black students. Like other schools in Charlotte, since the early 70s, these institutions were required to have a makeup reflecting the neighborhoods they existed in. But additionally, in 1992, the school board approved magnet programs, meaning students from different backgrounds, races, and classes were selected and bussed into diversified classrooms. The 6-year-old's father, a man named Bill Capaccione, and 6 other white families sued Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, saying the quota and busing systems were unfair. The presiding judge, a Reagan appointee named Robert Potter, known as Maximum Bob because of his long prison sentences, ordered the end of busing to begin in 1999, when I started kindergarten. Noted a columnist, because residential segregation persists, studies have found that if race were no longer allowed as a factor in assigning students to schools, about half the children in the district would attend single-race schools. This mattered because nationwide, single-race minority schools had smaller budgets and higher rates of teacher turnover. 18% of white teachers left their positions at predominantly black schools in 1995, which grew to 32% 6 years later. Black teachers were leaving as well. Maximum Bob's ruling to end busing was overturned in 2000. From 1995 until the end of the decade, desegregation efforts were lifted in multiple cities, including Cleveland, Denver, Nashville, and Oklahoma City. Schools that remain integrated could have racial tensions. For instance, at South Boston High School in 1993, a reported 200 students got into a fight. Of 928 students in the school, 37% were black, 27% were white, and 24% were Latino. South Boston's housing projects had just been forcibly integrated in the previous 5 years, and the area of 30,000, mostly Italian, Irish, and Lithuanian, was tense. 2 weeks before the riot, a white woman had been beaten up by a black man. So when a group of white students walked out on May 6th, there was an early dismissal, and some local white adults, along with students, hurled slurs, and the fighting began. When the dust settled, 3 white men were arrested, and the school, the same high school at the center of anti-busing protests and violence in the 70s, shut down for a week. In some pockets of the country, the most potent racial showdowns were over prom. In 1990, it was reported that 11 counties in Georgia alone had segregated proms, and many also held segregated class reunions. Take Peach County High School, whose school board stopped throwing proms when schools integrated in 1970. It was newsworthy when the school decided to hold its first integrated prom 20 years later. In 1991 Chicago, a group of black students at the all-male Brother Rice High School held their own prom with the music they prefer and the style they favor, insisting that white students and their dates could attend. The black students, who were 12% of the school's population, felt like they didn't have enough power in the official prom's planning process. It all started because the official prom's playlist was going to be culled from the top 3 suggestions of each member of the senior class, and because there were more white students than black ones, black songs wouldn't be chosen. Said one black senior, "We've been experiencing their culture for years, but they don't seem ready to experience ours." Some saw having their own prom as a metaphor for breaking away from a fraught political system and doing their own thing. Said one teen who decided to skip prom altogether, "I like the idea of the black students coming together to do something. They're well organized and they have their parents backing them. It's a matter of music." No white students attended the unofficial black prom despite being invited, and several were pissed off, with one saying, "Now you find out what they really think of you." Detailed the New York Times, and so while about 200 white couples and 6 black couples danced to rock music in 2 adjoining ballrooms at the Marriott Hotel, about 30 black couples listened to the Isley Brothers and Roy Ayers, danced the electric slide, and crowned their own prom king and queen at the McCormick Hotel. Hours into the evening, there were bursts of applause as several of the black couples who had gone to the main prom to spend time with their white friends showed up at the McCormick. An angry black observer wrote into the Chicago Tribune saying, "I think every effort should be made to help those young black students know and understand that they were basically wrong in having a separate prom." But one of the black prom's organizers, Edward Jones, said, "We love being black. This makes me proud to be black. If at our 20th year reunion the white students want to sit and point fingers at us, that's okay. We know we did something meaningful." Does anybody have a plug on Edward Jones from Chicago, graduated Brother Rice in 1991? Because, I want to ask him, how did the reunion go? Was they mad? I bet they were still mad. There were segregated proms all over the country, but at least the black students at Brother Rice had invited non-black students. In Bastrop High School in Louisiana that same year, segregated homecoming and proms were expected, and nobody was allowed to go to the white prom who wasn't white. When 2 best friends, one white and one black, complained, tensions boiled into a student vote. Complained the principal, "It's a good idea in another place. People aren't ready for that in Bastrop. It's not our custom down here to have integrated dances." Said one white 17-year-old, "I'm against it because I couldn't stand it if one of them said to my girlfriend, 'I want to dance.' I heard a bunch of them say, 'Yeah, we're gonna dance with them white girls.'" And the Oscar goes to... While the students voted 240 to 229 to integrate prom, the white prom committee chose to have a separate, whites-only spring formal. In February 1994, 55-year-old principal Hewlin Humphreys told assembled students at Randolph County High School in Wendowee, Alabama, that he would cancel prom, which was integrated, if anybody attempted to bring a date of a different race. An interracial girl with a black mother and white father named Revonda Bowen, who had a white boyfriend named Chris Brown, facetiously asked who she, as a mixed girl, should bring, which led the principal of 26 years to call her birth a mistake. This event catapulted the small town of 800 to 900 people into the media spotlight. 33% of the school was black, as was the town, and Revonda's parents, as well as her mother's community, rebuked the principal. The thing was, prom was just the catalyst for addressing other racial problems that black parents had been afraid to address. The principal was briefly suspended, but then over 100 white townspeople protested on his behalf, and he was reinstated. This caused approximately 100 black students to be withdrawn from the school and enrolled into freedom schools. Reported the New York Times, "Now the blacks of Wendowee are plotting strategy over eggs, grits, and ham, crowding into school board meetings, organizing alternative schools in church basements, and expressing their views to national civil rights organizations and the federal authorities." The black parents of Wendowee voiced their overall concerns with the school district, prompting a Justice Department investigation of the entire school district, which had only recently segregated school buses in 1988. Per Education Week, roughly a quarter of the 2,400 students who attend the Randolph County schools are black, according to the Alabama Education Department. Yet the Justice Department found that the district's central office staff, its principals, and its guidance counselors are all white. Since the district was ordered to desegregate in 1970, the percentage of black teachers has dropped by more than 60%. It was also determined that Humphreys, who was known to implement corporal punishments for infractions like having a bad attitude, punished black students way more often than white ones. Revonda Bowen eventually won a $25,000 settlement against the school district, and 21 couples attended a counter prom in defiance of the school's support of Humphreys. In August, it was announced that Humphreys was being replaced, and mysteriously on August 6th, after Humphreys was seen leaving his office for the final time with a box of his belongings, the school was set on fire. Chris Lynn Johnson, the son of Reverend Emmett Johnson, a vocal boycott leader, was arrested for the crime. Insanely, Humphreys had brought gas to school 2 days before the fire, but was never seriously investigated by police. Johnson was eventually found not guilty in 1995, but nobody was ever punished for the arson, and black locals insisted the arrest and trial were done to intimidate them. Meanwhile, Humphreys went on to be the superintendent of the Randolph County School District. What else was going on with American schools in the 90s? Let's travel to Lakewood, California. From 1991 to 1993, the small, insular suburb of mostly white families had been plagued by a series of burglaries, thefts, and petty crimes. Young children who had witnessed the perpetrators were bullied and threatened into silence. Police treated this pattern of crimes as aberrations until a pipe bomb exploded on someone's front porch in February 1993. There were whispers about a gang of white teen boys named the Spur Posse, and the sheriff's office invited 25 families to a meeting to talk about the rash of crimes. Each family was chosen because they were believed to have at least one member of the posse. While only 15 people showed up to the meeting, by this time, 6 girls accused various Spur Posse members of sexual assault. The following month, 9 enrolled and former Lakewood High students were arrested for sexual crimes on girls as young as 10 years old. It was revealed that the Spur Posse had been playing a game in which penetrating a girl counted as a point. The story made nationwide news and very quickly raised discourse about masculinity, casual sex, white privilege, and the all-American teen boy. Thoroughly reported by Joan Didion in Trouble in Lakewood and Susan Faludi in Stiffed, The Roots of Modern Male Rage. The language of hooking up or getting a point became mainstream. Many of the boys appeared on talk shows like Jenny Jones for $1,000, and they claimed that all of their sexual encounters were consensual, while appearing contemptuous and cocky. Several ended up approaching talent agencies to sell the rights to their story, but were declined. What was their story? The posse was started by a teen named Dana Bellman, who went on to serve 10 years in jail for unrelated charges of fraud and conspiracy. His mom, Dottie, would tell a reporter about the posse's sexual partners and victims. "Those girls are trash." Meanwhile, her other son, Chris, had 2 children at the age of 18 by 1996. The LA District Attorney declined to prosecute in all but one of the cases against the posse, specifically the 16-year-old who sexually assaulted a 10-year-old. His father said the whole thing was blown out of proportion. Said another mother of a Spur, "It's sad for the girls that they have such low self-esteem that they would do this." Remarked Time, she found no self-esteem problem in her son's behavior. "What can you do?" she said. "It's a testosterone thing." It's interesting that self-esteem of the girls came up when the boys were literally competing to lie to, seduce, cajole, and assault as many girls as possible for social points. At the center was a teenage desire to fit in, misogyny, and a lust for fame. Said the posse's highest scoring member, Billy Sheehan, "That's my worst fear, that I'll die in nothing. I know that can't happen. I know I was meant to be a brand name, but a very small part of me says, what if nothing happens? What if I'm a common person?" While he'd never be a brand name, he'll live on forever in this really amazing history retrospective about how shitty of a guy he was. Billy's mother, Joyce, begged producers to not allow him on TV. But when their time in the news cycle was over, the lead point scorer, Billy, found it hard to get a job. Dana and Chris Bellman's mother told the Washington Post that she saw things differently in 1996. She gave her kids too many material things, too much praise, not enough responsibility. She closed her eyes to the drinking, the gambling, the swearing, the violence on TV, the socks on the floor, the condoms in the car ashtray, the overdeveloped pectorals, and egos. A key facet of the Spur controversy was the rush to blame everyone but the parents and the teen perpetrators. For conservatives, one of the alleged influences was comprehensive sex education, which was on the rise in the wake of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. From 1984 to 1994, 17 states had adopted comprehensive sex education, and suddenly the condom on a banana demonstration became the norm. But not in Mississippi, North Carolina, South Dakota, Oklahoma, and Texas. Said one parent of a Spur Posse member, "Schools hand out condoms, teach safe sex. It's the society. They have these clinics, they have abortions. They don't have to tell their parents. What does that tell you?" It's worth noting that Lakewood High didn't have assemblies on date rape, sexual harassment, and consent until after the Spur Posse controversy. Comprehensive sex ed still had growing to do. Not that this mattered to commentators like the writer of 1994's The Failure of Sex Education, Barbara Defoe Whitehead. She concluded, "What sex educators are offering now is training in sexual survival. Once the kids have been equipped with refusal skills, a bottle of body oil, and some condoms, reality-based advocates send them into the world to fend for themselves." The conversation about condoms was still so controversial that Dr. Joycelyn Elders, the first Black Surgeon General, was dubbed the condom queen by conservatives. She was one of the biggest public champions for thorough, comprehensive sex ed, and she was eventually fired by the triangulating Clinton in 1994 for advocating for teaching about masturbation in schools. At the heart of much of the conservative backlash to comprehensive sex education was the growing inclusivity of lesbian and gay sex safety practices in curriculum, as well as the growth of gay culture. Children and teens had questions, but not always the outlets to ask them and receive non-bigoted answers. In 1994 San Diego, a teacher named Toni Wanick came under fire for bringing her 27-year-old gay son, a computer engineer named Nick Ashton Hart, into her second grade American Sign Language class and allowing the students to ask him questions. They asked things like, "Do all gay people have AIDS? Does everyone with AIDS die? When did you know you were gay? Was your mother mad at you when you told her? Have you ever had sex with a man?" Toni brought in her son because the youth had been making homophobic remarks, but she didn't notify the principal or parents. One pissed-off father wrote a letter to the school district saying, "My daughter proudly pronounced, I learned that gays are born that way and that we shouldn't make fun of them or tease them because what they do is not wrong and no different from what anyone else does." Miss Wanick was moved to another school. The number of teens coming out as gay, lesbian, or bisexual in New York's most prestigious single-sex prep schools in the mid to late 90s prompted New York Times coverage. Some parents were pissed because they specifically sent their children to same-sex schools to be free of romance and sexuality, so they were troubled by queer clubs and resources. The murders of Matthew Shepard and Brandon Teena are discussed in episode 6. But the fallout of the crimes caused an increased awareness of homophobia, especially in American schools. In California in 1999, a law was passed requiring schools to protect students from sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination. Still, in most places, casual homophobia was the norm. The Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network found in a 1999 study of 496 gay adolescents that 69% had been harassed and 42% had been physically harassed or assaulted. In addition to a backlash against queer pride and inclusivity, there was the fear of internet porn. An 18-month Carnegie Mellon study that concluded in 1995 found that 917,410 pictures, descriptions, short stories, and film clips existed on the internet, and that 83% of pictures posted on the web were pornographic, and most of it was stuff scanned from the pages of magazines found at adult bookstores. The paper would be cited in numerous anti-porn measures and articles, but it was misleading, with critics noting that the data was collected primarily from XXX bulletin board systems, offering memberships where people could trade pictures and erotic texts for $10 to $30 a month. Said a lawyer, "It's as if one purported to have done a study of violence among American men when the sample of men studied were prisoners in the federal penitentiary." Additionally, sexual abuse media was too often grouped with consensual porn. That same year, Nebraska Democrat Senator James Exon and Republican Washington Senator Slade Gorton co-sponsored a bill to update the Communications Decency Act. The bill would impose fines of over $100,000 and 2-year prison terms to people who made porn or anything obscene, including foul language, available to children, which would make online service providers liable for the content posted on their networks. This caused arguments about the freedom of the internet, because now people would be held responsible for making sure adult content meant for adults didn't get into the hands of children, aka doing parenting for people. A 1995 poll of 1,000 respondents found that 48% were against FCC-like control of the internet. And surprisingly, conservative Newt Gingrich went against his fellow conservatives and called the amendment a violation of free speech, and it's a violation of the right of adults to communicate with each other. Wow! Newt Gingrich got it right once. And when he dies, and I'm sure it'll be soon, you can say something nice about him before you begin the dragging. James Exxon asked a friend to download the nastiest porn he could find and put printouts in a blue folder for senators to view on the floor while voting for the measure.
When I have shown this to members on both sides of the aisle, there has been shock, registered obviously on the face of my colleagues. Shocked because few understand what is going on today with regard to the pollution of the internet. I cannot, would not show these pictures to the Senate, would not want our cameras to pick them up.
The bill passed 84-16, with the final version stripping liability from internet services and without the portion banning indecent speech. In 1997, the act was ruled unconstitutional by a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, with judges noting the law should have been limited to intentionally distributing obscene materials, rather than requiring people to block access to minors everywhere at all times, which is essentially impossible. When sex ed, homosexuality, and porn weren't the topics of conversation, sex in mainstream media was a target. While there were clean hits like Seventh Heaven, Touched by an Angel, Boy Meets World, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Promised Land, shows like Freaks and Geeks, Beverly Hills 90210, That 70s Show, and Dawson's Creek frequently included conversations and depictions of sex that drew complaints. Music videos starring idols like Britney Spears were derided too. In the 1996 Telecommunications Act, a rider was added mandating that TVs over 13 inches must include a V-chip after 1999. The V-chip allowed parents to lock inappropriate programming with a 4-digit PIN, though it wouldn't block unrated programming like commercials, infomercials, or news/sports. And many parents ultimately found it too complicated to use. Also in 1996, TV parental guidelines were unveiled and took effect on January 1st, 1997. One of the main advocates for cleaning up TV was Democrat Paul Simon, who pushed for an outside monitor to watch for violent content. He didn't say anything about sexual content, but an array of politicians and parents supported the V-chip and ratings as a way to filter anything explicit. Said Bill Clinton when signing the act into law, "If every parent uses this chip wisely, it can become a powerful voice against teen violence, teen pregnancy, teen drug use, and for both learning and entertainment. We're handing the TV remote control back to America's parents so that they can pass on their values and protect their children." This same year, the New York Times reported on the regularity of underage kids sneaking into R-rated movies, noting, "NR is not so much as a prohibition as a challenge. It rarely stops anyone with a desire to outwit the system." This brings me to Southpark, which I know you don't think I forgot, and debuted in 1997.
Meet Southpark's Kenny, the lucky one. Kenny dies in South Park every Wednesday at 10 p.m. here at Comedy Central.
The show was so raunchy and explicit that Fox Network passed on it because creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone refused to get rid of Mr. Hanky, the talking piece of literal shit. The show, which lampooned American culture, became a hit within a few months. It had 2.3 million viewers an episode by October 1998, and a movie was quickly announced. Argued Parker, "Some reporters are saying that the show is nothing but F-slur jokes and racist slurs. The show is racist in the same way that Archie Bunker was racist. South Park is a town inhabited by stupid people, and stupid people say stupid things." It It became a hit with kids and teens, while parents were warned by schools and media that the cartoon, despite appearances, was for mature audiences. Clothing bans happened at various schools nationwide, including when a Cromwell, Connecticut district relented on a total ban and eventually settled for a prohibition on just 2 t-shirts. Reported the Chicago Tribune, the cute cartoon show may be irresistible to kids, but it has a richly deserved mature audience-only rating, and is Exhibit A in the case for the V-chip. When Southpark, bigger, longer, and uncut, premiered in 1999, it went on to become the highest-grossing R-rated animated film for a period of time. It utilized 399 profanities and 221 acts of violence, and the MPAA regretted not giving it an NC-17 rating. In the movie, a V-chip was implanted in Cartman's brain and electrocuted him whenever he swore.
Now say Montana.
Montana.
Good. Now pillow.
Pillow.
All right. Now I want you to say horsefucker.
Go ahead, Eric. It's all right. Horsefucker. That hurt, goddammit. Ow! Fuck!
Now I'd like you to say big floppy donkey dick.
No!
Success! The child doesn't want to swear.
This isn't fair. Your son's a begging.
We will start putting V-chips in all our children next week.
There were news reports of youngsters successfully and unsuccessfully trying to sneak into the film and other R-rated movies like Pulp Fiction, Eyes Wide Shut, Lake Placid, American Pie, The Wood, and the extremely controversial and NC-17 release, Kids.
You know what? I have sex and I like fucking. I don't give a hell yeah, girlfriend. I love sex, girl. It's like the best thing. I love sex. There's nothing better. It's the best thing. That's it. No. Not sex. Foreplay.
So in 1999, there was a bigger push to enforce ratings at movie theaters. The strict enforcement of the R rating was the result of an agreement worked out recently between President Clinton and major theater owners in reaction to the Littleton, Colorado school massacre. Rap music also continued to be a source of anxieties and pushes for censorship. In 1990 in Miami, Florida, the album As Nasty As They Wanna Be was ruled obscene by a judge. The owner of a record store, George Freeman, was convicted on obscenity charges for selling it. Luther, Uncle Luke Campbell, and 2 other members of the band were arrested while performing at a strip club in Broward County. During the obscenity trial, all of the members were acquitted, and Henry Louis Gates Jr. notably appeared to argue in favor of not censoring explicit music as black tradition, which, as we'll find out in the next episode, was objected to by voices like C. Dolores Tucker. 2 Live Crew capitalized on the new publicity with Banned in the USA, featuring a sample of Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, with his blessing. Parental advisory stickers, which had come into play in the 80s, became more popular this decade, but these rarely stopped teens from buying what they wanted. And by the end of the decade, the advent of Napster in 1999 and other music sharing websites made the consumption of music, regardless of content, easy. Movies, TV, and music weren't the only targets. On youth bookshelves, there were 90s drops like A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, Holes by Louis Satcher, Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging by Louise Renison, Captain Underpants by Dov Pilkey, and The Giver by Lois Lowry. The popular Goosebumps series started in 1992 by R.L. Stine, geared towards younger readers who crave scary stories like his other series, Fear Street. And Goosebumps were the 15th most challenged book between 1990 and 1999. The first Harry Potter book, written by British author J.K. Rowling, was published across the pond in June 1997. Scholastic brought the series to America in September 1998, the first day of the Hogwarts school year, and it quickly became a mega phenomenon.
Potter definitely works magic. The books are disappearing off the shelves.
Hundreds. We've sold hundreds of each, each of the 3 different ones that are currently in release. It's hard to keep them on the shelf. We have massive bulk orders all the way through the holidays for these, and we're just hoping that we'll be able to match the demand.
Not everyone's sold on the Harry Potter books. In some cities, people have protested them, saying kids shouldn't be reading them because they deal with wizardry. So far in Knoxville, no one's publicly criticized the books. Although some people may not approve of them, you'd never know it at the Knox County Library, the waiting list at this branch is close to 100. Instead of criticism, Most people only have good things to say, specifically that the books encourage children to read.
When I finish it, I just want to read it again and again and again and over and over again.
Within 4 years, Harry Potter was 28% of the children's literature market, leading to the creation of the New York Times Children's Bestsellers list. It also encouraged more youth reading, including me, who had been given a copy of the first book after throwing a particularly violent temper tantrum in the first grade. And it led to higher investment in the youth literature market. But also, the books were a high point of contention among conservative American parents, with the series being challenged 23 times in 13 states in 1999 alone. Said the founder of family-friendly libraries to LA Times, "They talk about death as the next great adventure, so the violence and the death culture suggested by it is of great concern." People held book burnings and continued to disparage the hit series as demonic, but the backlash died down by the early 2000s as the series only grew in popularity. Book bans were big in the 90s. For example, between 1992 and 1993, organizations succeeded in 41% of 347 attempts to ban books in schools. And this included the 7% of cases where liberals were targeting books they perceived to be racist. And these became showdowns. In Wichita Falls, Texas, the ACLU won a restraining order against the city for removing Heather Has Two Mommies and Daddy's Roommate from the children's area of the library after 300 homophobic residents signed a petition to ban them. At Venado Middle School in Irvine, California, a teacher was criticized for issuing copies of Fahrenheit 451, a book about censorship, with the cuss words blacked out. James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl was banned at a Lufkin, Texas elementary school because of the word ass. When a scene featuring child sex trafficking in Mark Mataban's Kafir Boy was called pornographic, the author wrote, "I included it in the book not to titillate readers, but to reveal a disturbing truth about life under apartheid." The book was later reissued with less details. If Harry Potter, Dawson's Creek sex, and lewd rump-shaking music was mainstream, and it was mainstream, what did that leave for good evangelical and fundamentalist-leaning Christian kids and their tired parents? Never fear, there was a new bustling conservative youth outreach culture, featuring new obsessions like the best-selling apocalyptic Left Behind series by the evangelical minister Tim LaHaye, which even I read. There were also hell houses. These gory morality performances designed for Christians to act out their deepest fears, and some might say fantasies, had emerged in the 1970s but blew up in the 90s. They competed with Halloween activities for children and teenagers' mortal souls, often employing college students to play the roles of the damned. The Abundant Life Christian Center's Hell House in Colorado had gory depictions of an abortion, a homosexual dying of AIDS, drunken driving, teen suicide, and hell, according to Christianity Today. And by charging $5 a head, the Hell House made $17,000 during a 5-day period in 1995. It was so popular that their Hell House reportedly expanded to 16 nights in 1996. For people not in Colorado, the church sold $149 Hell House kits. Buyers get a 263-page manual, a video of the Denver Hell House, and a tape or compact disc with sound effects. The manual includes everything from a script to prop advice, including do your very best to buy or purchase a meat product that will resemble as much as possible pieces of a baby that are being placed in the glass bowl for all to see. There were reported 352 kits sold by 1998, when Abundant Life was charging $7 a head for their Hell House and expecting thousands of visitors. That same year, Abundant Life added a new scene to its repertoire, an Oval Office scene featuring a trio of temptress demonic spirits, lies, lust, and adultery, as well as a Bill Clinton figure and a dark-haired woman in a beret. The Hell House kits went around the country, but not everybody went all out. A Colorado pastor made his Hell House less bloody, less scary, and less lusty, axing the scene on Satan worship because we didn't feel like it was relevant, and sometimes that actually encourages activity. Why throw in something just because it's spooky? Other churches zeroed in on drunk driving. Asked one at their 1993 Hell House, "If you died tonight in a car wreck, do you know for sure if you would go to heaven or hell?" By the way, thanks to over 10 years of educating, drunk driving among teens was on a permanent decline from 1991 onward. In Colchester, Illinois, a church Hell House had a local doctor, strongly opposed to abortion, donate a real examining table with stirrups. In an Indiana Hell House, there was a scene including a teenage boy who has died of AIDS after believing he was born gay. Added the Courier-Journal, visitors will be led into a setting permeated with smoke and a pungent smell as sinners cry out for salvation. If visitors wish, they can pray with church members. The flyer advertised, if you can't take the heat, stay out of hell. By 1999, a further 435 kits were reported sold in 46 states and 8 foreign countries. And the program drew fire that year when there was an incorporation of the Columbine massacre. To people who complained, Hell House defenders said there were worse things in popular media, and that such events were necessary to catch the attention of the MTV generation. Hey, are you still here? Are you enjoying this trip through the 1990s? Are you thinking about how much information this is and thinking about how long it took me to research, write, and produce it? Make sure you show support by subscribing on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you get access to sources and early access to new content. For $3 a month, you get study guides, glossaries, and word puzzles for each feature-length episode of the series. For $5 a month, you get all of that, plus the exclusive video series, Deep Cuts, where nostalgia, pop culture, and history collide. For $10 a month, you get listed in the credits of I Love the 90s episodes. Patrons at the $25 through $50 tier get limited edition merch and listed in the credits of every video. Check the link in my description box for more information. And of course, if you don't want monthly subscriptions, trust me, I understand, but you still want to help me produce these, you can send a one-time tip on PayPal or purchase downloadable glossaries and study guides from my website. A free way to help this series grow is by liking, commenting, and sharing. Now, back to the history. In 1990, Virgin Records America co-chairman Jeff Iroff and Steve Barr founded Rock the Vote with the intent to get 18 to 24-year-olds to vote. Per their PR, Rock the Vote officials insist that only when the young people prove they're willing to vote in large numbers will politicians specifically speak to their interests. Rock the Vote partnered with MTV and tried to meet the youth on their turf at festivals and concerts. This was perfect because Rock the Vote's predominant purpose was so that the music industry could fight calls for censorship. Lollapalooza started as an alternative music tour in 1991 with acts including Jane's Addiction and Ice-T, and inaugural tents included Rock the Vote ambassadors. The festival very quickly became commercialized and strayed from its alternative roots, and Rock the Vote also released a high-profile Madonna ad that pissed off the veterans of foreign affairs. Said a spokesman, "This borders on desecration of the flag." MTV ran news segments described by LA Times as flashily edited 4-minute reports about education, the environment, the economy, abortion, AIDS, and affirmative action. Critics said MTV was selling a liberal agenda to its young viewers, while MTV insisted it was both reflecting its viewers' tastes and presenting a full picture. Other critics said that MTV Rock the Vote segments were boiled down swill that created uninformed voters. Complained Mark Crispin Miller, "If there are people who actually have to be told by MTV that there is an election going on, they shouldn't be voting anyway. If they are that tuned out, let them just stay inside and worry about their Reeboks." This attitude was rebuffed by Steve Barr, who said in 1992, "Many 20-year-olds might already have their opinions set, but the 12 or 13-year-olds, if every time they turn around they are hit with the message that the only way to have a voice is to vote, those are our real targets." Now, there are 2 milestones to look forward to as you grow up: 16 to drive and 21 to drink. We intend to add 18 and the right to vote to that. Some Republican strategists said that their party should be trying to reach the youth vote in a similar way. Meanwhile, nobody of note seemed to mention that while Rock the Vote was making voting cool, nobody was being upfront about the money entangled in electoral politics. Overall, there was an increase in youth voter participation from 36.2% in 1988 to 42.8% in 1992. Clinton, who appeared on youth-oriented shows and courted them big time, took 50% of their vote, while 30% voted for Bush and 20% voted for Perot. It was the highest youth voter turnout in 20 years, but it wouldn't be matched in the next decade. Generation X was checking out, allegedly. In 1990, an article called 20-something in Time magazine reported that there were 48 million people aged 18 to 29, and that they were aimless and shiftless. Among the worries were the 75% of Generation X men who lived at home, the largest proportion since the Great Depression, 40% of Generation X being products of divorce, and their lack of consensus on a generational hero. Can you believe it? Only 8% of them considered the Gipper a hero, and 6% gave it to Jesse Jackson. A Accompanying a growing disconnect to electoral politics was a pessimism about the future, the economy, and the environment. In the face of an alienation from consumerist culture, a growing segment of Generation X would push back against consuming. There were guides to live simpler lives and to consume less. On MTV's hit show Daria, the consumerism, social classes, and affluence culture of suburbia was parodied and mocked. According to Time magazine, 60% of Generation X wanted a free Tibet. The struggle for a Tibet free from Chinese rule came into national American attention for youth via the Tibetan Freedom Concert in 1996, which brought over 100,000 people out to jam to De La Soul, the Beastie Boys, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Bjork, and Smashing Pumpkins. The event generated $800,000 for Tibet. Subsequent concerts were less successful, but nonetheless raised youth public consciousness about the Tibetan independence movement. 43% of Generation X were also environmentally conscious and responded to warnings to recycle and other simple things to save the world. They wanted to travel to more exotic places than typical European spots, like Bangkok in India, where culture took priority over luxury. A majority of Generation X also wanted a career with flexibility and weekends off, claiming they didn't care about growth and would be happy being middlemen forever. For many Generation Xers, a major point of contention was the concept of selling out. In the 1994 film Reality Bites, the prototypical young 20-something Leilani, played by Winona Ryder, is an aspiring documentarian, torn between a sellout TV executive named Michael, played by Ben Stiller, and a perpetually unemployed artistic slacker named Troy, played by Ethan Hawke.
Come on, let's go. You don't need this. You don't know what she needs. I think I know what she needs in a way that you never will.
In addition to choosing a boyfriend, Leilani is on a job hunt, but refuses to work at the Gap and sell out. How was Generation X supposed to survive in the vicious economy while maintaining their integrity? This conundrum annoyed early grumpy observers, who saw members of Generation X as whiny, complaining, obnoxious brats and slackers, the results of absentee parents and neglect in the era of yuppie materialism. In that 20-somethings article, the authors partially blame Reagan, who they said taught Generation X problems can be shelved until later. In 1993's The Boring 20s, Christopher Georges yawned that Generation X, if a nation, would be richer than 86% of the world's countries based on buying power. The tagline of the article, "Grow up, crybabies, you're America's luckiest generation." This was the key criticism pointed towards Gen X. Their never-before-seen levels of privilege and opportunity. Wrote Georges, dollar for dollar, they spend more money on movies and entertainment than any other age group. They play more tennis in private clubs and are more likely to belong to health clubs. They're more likely to own snow skis, attend pro football games, own jogging shoes, attend cocktail parties, the theater, concerts, and comedy clubs, buy compact discs and TVs, own VCRs and camcorders and rent videotapes. They spend more on domestic airplane trips for vacation purposes than any other group. And the percentage of college students, 70%, owning credit cards far exceeds that of the rest of the population. While Generation X was 70% white compared to Boomers' 77%, the group was still overwhelmingly white. Georges also pointed out that the angst of mostly white upper-class teens and young adults paled in comparison to the lower classes and single mom families, and also cited a UCLA study finding that among Generation X, their first priority is themselves. By the second half of the decade, Generation X had been rebranded in George's perception, with The Atlantic saying they had turned out to be ambitious, independent, pragmatic, and self-sufficient. In the era of the internet, entrepreneurship and tech prowess became a new hallmark of Generation X culture, while also providing community and an entirely different learning map. Wrote Martin Miller in 1999, instead of inheriting McJobs, they've created a jobs.com world. Where did this new pragmatic spirit come from? In 1990, it was reported that a person under 30 with a degree could earn 4 times as much money as someone without it. But from the period of 1985 to 1995, the earnings for recent college grads fell by nearly 10% for the first time ever. Between 1977 and 1997, median student loans rose from $2,000 to $15,000. These newbie taxpayers were also paying higher taxes than their parents did, for less social services in the process. These new financial realities created a change in political and social priorities. At the end of the decade, or the end of history, 61% of Generation X agreed with the statement, "Politicians and political leaders failed my generation." Generation X was different from the boomers in a number of ways. 48% said religion was very important to them, compared to 39% of boomers in 1978. A national election survey said that 68% of Generation X opposed affirmative action, which was framed predominantly as a race issue. New America think tank founder Ted Halstead argued in the Radical Center, The Future of American Politics, that Generation X wanted a synthesis of fiscal conservatism and Democrats by rejecting deficits but not cutting taxes and social services to achieve budget surpluses. They also wanted an end to tax breaks and subsidies for corporations. Halstead theorized that this disenfranchised group of voters, along with some of their elders, could be the next major political coalition, if they could be wooed. 2 years after that massive voter turnout in 1992, less than 1 in 5 Generation Xers participated, compared to half of the similarly aged population in 1972. While they were more likely to abstain from civic activities and were less trusting of government, nearly half of Generation X volunteered in their communities. In the 1996 elections, there was only a 32% participation rate thanks to the rising perception among Generation X that Republicans and Democrats were the same. 44% of Generation X considered themselves independent. Halstead and others wanted to harness this group. Rob Nielsen, author of 1994's Revolution X, along with John Cowan, future creator of the centrist think tank Third Way, created Lead or Leave. The organization billed itself as the largest Generation X political organization in the U.S. It demanded that officials resign if they couldn't reduce the deficit in 4 years, in their eyes caused by entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. The organization raised $1.3 million in 3 years and garnered support from Ross Perot, Paul Tsongas, and other outsider candidates. Several other groups would form and fizzle out, because this radical centrism, as it came to be known, would fail among youth voters. Perhaps because it discounted the importance of several subcultures and issues that were the gritty and overlooked components of Generation X. Feeling unheard in the realm of politics, how did discontent subcultures carve their own spaces and exist outside of the mainstream, for better and worse? While some parents voiced their anger with sexuality in media, there was a new youth-oriented movement regarding purity and sexuality. The CDC reported that between 1991 and 1997, the percentage of teenagers who had sex had decreased by 11%, using a national survey of 50,000 respondents. There was also a rise in condom use among the sexually active, as well as a decrease in teen pregnancy and STDs. The rise in safe sex and abstinence was attributed to thorough sex education programs and fears about HIV/AIDS, while teen chastity was elevated in profile due to the True Love Waits program, which started under Baptist minister Richard Ross. Described the LA Times, "His is not the first campaign of its kind, but it certainly is the most visible. With rallies, ceremonies, t-shirts, and wallet-sized pledge cards, True Love Waits has ignited the zeal of teenagers across the country." In 1994, 25,000 youth placed 250,000 abstinence pledge cards on the National Mall, though their goal had been to collect 500,000. Several teens interviewed by the Virginia Pilot said that they made the pledge in defiance of media and peer group expectations to have sex. For evangelical youth, the discussion of teen abstinence and sex was a new concept that became necessary because of their belief of the proliferation of sexually degenerate culture.
And I just want to purify my body because he's dwelling in it. And he said in his word to abstain till marriage, and that's what I want to do.
What's your name? Where you from?
My name is Creston Smith from University of Maryland and St. Wales, Maryland.
In 1998, the same year of the first Purity Ball in Colorado Springs, teenager Joshua Harris published I Kiss Dating Goodbye. The book, which Joshua later disavowed, argued for a return to old-fashioned courting and warned against kissing or hand-holding before marriage, and sold over 1 million copies. Thousands of religious youth would follow the rigid purity culture offered by Joshua Harris, evangelical leaders, churches, and propaganda. As the CDC would note, these youth were more likely to have unsafe sex when many inevitably reneged on their chastity vows, said the director of education for Planned Parenthood in 1994. Along with abstinence, we need to supply kids with information about sexually transmitted disease and contraception. Vows of chastity break more often than condoms. But indoctrinated youth on the National Mall and in articles rejected the calls for sex ed, saying it was a part of the cultural pressure to have sex before marriage. These teens and young adults who showed up in the thousands to call for abstinence and purity were a subculture, and they were pretty unhappy about the America they lived in. But they weren't the only ones. The Seattle grunge music scene was popularized by Nirvana's second album, 1991's Nevermind. The same year, unknown band Pearl Jam starred as extras in a movie about Seattle Gen Xers called Singles, which released the next year. Nevermind featured the mega hit Smells Like Teen Spirit, which was played at least 4 to 5 times a day on MTV at its peak. The album dethroned Michael Jackson and went on to sell over 30 million copies, and bands like Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and Temple of the Dog rose in prominence, while Kurt Cobain became a cult celebrity and a supposed voice of his generation. This idolization also brought unwanted international fame and attention to Cobain and other musicians in the scene. Grunge was quickly commercialized on the high-fashion runways of Perry Ellis and Marc Jacobs, covered in magazines and TV, and turned into a trend. The New York Times infamously fell for a grunge prank in 1992. It reported, "All subcultures speak in code, grunge is no exception." Megan Jasper, a 25-year-old in Seattle, provided this lexicon of grunge speak, coming soon to a high school or mall near you. Megan listed out lame stain for uncool person, cobnobbler for loser, and swinging on the flippity flop for hanging out. A cute guy was a dish, and harsh realm was a bummer. Journalist Thomas Frank contacted Megan Jasper to inquire if the list was real, and she admitted she made the terms up as a joke, which was then publicized in a 1993 article in The Baffler, embarrassing the New York Times. Damn, harsh realm. So grunge was dying by the end of 1993, the same year that the band Marilyn Manson began rising in popularity. The April 8th suicide of Kurt Cobain in 1994, plus Pearl Jam's boycott of booking venues through Ticketmaster, faded Seattle grunge into the background. But also in the Pacific Northwest was the feminist riot girl movement, which we dive into in the next episode. Goth culture was an evolution of punk, glam, and goth rock, and was especially popular among a mostly ex-Catholic and white population. While goths were especially identified in the mid-90s as wearing all black with costume makeup and being obsessed with bands like Marilyn Manson, Sisters of Mercy, Switchblade Symphony, and Susie and the Banshees, goths also enjoyed poetry, art, and literature, including the works of Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, and Anne Rice, whose 1976's novel, Interview with a Vampire, was turned into a very popular movie starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt in 1994. As Gothic themes emerged in a variety of films like The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Addams Family, Sleepy Hollow, The Crow, and other movies, some Goths denounced posers who weren't fully into the subculture, which wasn't a monolith. Various societal taboos in the 90s were thrust onto the reputation of goths, prompting one 17-year-old named Gabriella Lovejoy to say, "The day that people see me on the street and assume I have violent intentions because of my dislike of pastels will be a sad one indeed."
But, Debbie, what? Pastels?
Get out of my house!
The Seattle News and Observer wrote, "These are, in general, what goths are not. Satan worshippers, fetish and sadomasochism devotees, street punks, Wiccans, black magicians, vampire wannabes, role-playing gamers, although small sections of these groups overlap into each other and into the Gothic community." One goth explained the appeal, saying, "Sexual orientation, relationship status, they don't really matter. Musical taste and what you look like is the criteria on which you're judged. The outside stuff, where you work, what you do, doesn't matter." Of course, the clothes could be expensive, so goths could also be superficial, admitted multiple goths interviewed in newspapers. Others mentioned their disdain with society as it was, though not all were inherently political. Goth teens and young adults gathered for goth nights at establishments in cities like San Francisco, Tampa, Chicago, and New Orleans. Wrote the Tampa Bay, outsiders might be surprised to know that goths cut a mean rug. Typical goth dancing is a highly individualistic mixture of flowing movements and statuesque contortions. Added a goth, that's part of the exhibitionist thing. You gotta be able to get on the dance floor and be seen. How many people on that floor either are or have been at some point theater majors? Probably 95%. Because goths were having their moment in the 90s, they were also regulars on the talk show circuit, and we'll be back to them by the end of this episode. Also in the early 90s, raves were all the rave. These impromptu, permitless parties were promoted in underground newspapers, clubs, cafes, music stores, and later, the internet. In the earliest days, you had to call a phone number and get instructions on how to get to the map point, which was where you'd receive your ticket or catch transportation to the real location, which could be old abandoned warehouses, water parks, beaches, tunnels, parking garages, etc. Reported the LA Times, the promoters, many of whom hold day jobs, are after-hours entrepreneurs who hope to make big money by renting empty warehouses, hiring DJs, and lighting technicians, and charging $20 to party till dawn. These parties rejected alcohol for nitrous gas and ecstasy, which had come into use among college kids in the 1980s before hitting the British house scene as an alternative to LSD. A 1990 survey found that 3.4% of people aged 19 to 32 had tried ecstasy, a time when little was known about the drug and it wasn't criminally prosecuted. Both ecstasy and laughing gas are out there. We know they're out there, but we can't even get to the big problems such as cocaine, said an LAPD detective in 1992. Because ecstasy, which at the time cost about $25 to $40 a hit, makes you dehydrated, bringing huge bottles of water to raves became the norm, and organizers sold smart drinks, or non-alcoholic fruit juices packed with amino acids. The tendency of ecstasy users to grind their teeth made oral fixations like blow pops, ring pops, and pacifiers a fashionable and functional addition to rave outfits, featuring cartoon clothing, whimsical accessories, and outlandish hair. Described one raver in 1997, it's a whole lifestyle for these kids now. You'll see kids sitting on the floor and they're playing with dolls and eating candy and you think you're back in kindergarten. I've even seen kids carrying blankies. The music played at raves, electronica and techno, became more mainstream as the raves themselves did too. The second half of the decade saw more raves being raided, arrests for ecstasy distribution and possession, record companies turning from alt to techno, and clubs seeking to cash in began holding legal raves featuring permits and alcohol, which kind of took a lot of the fun out of it. For many, raves were more than just an all-night party. It's a way for this generation to come together and vent their frustrations and disappointment with the world. This is a generation that really needs to cut loose. The economy is shot. We're trying to get through it, and this is a place where you can forget about it, said one 20-year-old to the Washington Post in 1997. Those weren't the only types of celebration as resistance in the 1990s. There was the continued importance of ball culture, especially in urban areas. The club kids, LGBT youth, and 20 to 30-somethings in New York who had come to prominence in the late 80s peaked in the early to mid-90s with a new young wave of flamboyant partygoers, wrote columnist and humorist Michael Musto. They felt a safe haven within that community, which they never would have felt in their hometowns. That's the best thing nightlife can provide. A home for disenfranchised people to come together and create a family where you're celebrated for the things you might have been made fun of back in the high school cafeteria. The club kid fashion, makeup, hair, and nightlife would be influential, though the scene died when Giuliani targeted illegal nightlife as mayor and when 25-year-old Andre Angel Melendez was murdered by party promoter Michael Alig. The ordeal was documented in 1998's Party Monster, the shockumentary. On the other side of the country, in Orange County, Sacramento, San Diego, and especially Southern California, there were vibrant underground scenes of ditch parties and backyard parties, particularly among high school-aged Chicanos. Most of the attendees at ditch parties were enrolled at awful and corrupt schools with little resources, compounded by the gang violence plaguing the hallways and streets in the early 90s. The added layer of anti-immigration sentiment, which culminated in Prop 187 and we discussed in episode 2, added to the stresses of being a Latino teen. These ditch parties became places of community and fun that would sometimes be interrupted by random gangsters causing trouble.
We just party, girls, and just trying to have fun, drink.
Everyone is searched at the door, but a few still manage to slip in with weapons.
The underground parties in LA were covered extensively by media like KLTV, often in the most negative light possible. Wrote the LA Times in 1995, "There's all these brown-skinned high school kids shuffling in low-crotch Jabot jeans and calling out such club names as Latin Madness, Thieves of Virginity, and Perfect Modern Sluts, PMS for short."
There's always another ditch party. More than ever, say the teenagers.
Well, I don't know, schools like this seem like they don't care about nobody, so why should we care about them? Whatever. Unforgiven!
On this Thursday morning last week, a group called Unforgiven throws a party in Koreatown. Dance partners, not school books, are what's important here, and the kids say it is easy to get away with.
I'm getting credit for right now, and look at me, I'm at a ditching party.
By 1995, the high school graduation rate for U.S. Latinos was below 60%, and the college graduation rate was below 10%. At these parties and backyard shindigs, the youth danced to mixes of house music, new wave, soul, and more for $2 to $10, where there were often alcohol or nitrous balloons and other whippets available for a quick high. And remember those club names? There were party crews. Guadalupe Rosales, who runs the Map Points Instagram page that archives these photos, and it's a really great page to check out, explained party crews were made up of 30 people or more and allowed young men and women like me to engage in resistant cultural practices. At a time when Latino communities in Los Angeles were often disempowered and criminalized by the public school system, party crews and raves were our way of organizing for the sake of unity.
This Koreatown ditch party was okayed by Bam Bam's mother.
But, she'd just rather see us, partying instead of gangbanging and shooting somebody else, killing somebody from our own race.
Yeah. Wrote Virginia Ace, the youths participated in a rejection of compulsory schooling and an educational system designed to maintain a steady supply of low-wage fungible workers. It was partying as resistance and capitalist enterprise, emphasis on enterprise.
Promoters make a good profit. Aaron B. is honest about what he calls taking advantage of a school system that isn't working.
You could defend it, but at the same time, I can't be, hypocrite and tell you we're doing good, the kids are supposed to be in school.
Yeah, we're gonna make them. They are here instead.
You guys might as well start going.
And police officers say they are constantly being called to break up the ditch parties.
Let's go, people! People on the corner!
200 delinquent kids can be a major headache for cops, already deluged with more pressing crime.
1995 was the peak year for these parties, as the attendees aged out, promoters and DJs moved to better opportunities, and party crews graduated to actual nightclubs. In the years to follow, the scores of Latinos who had been empowered to join electoral politics after the passage of Prop 187 would mean more focus on schooling inequities. All of these party scenes showed entrepreneurs that the youth wanted to dance and needed safe places to do so. While teen clubs had existed in the 80s, the 90s saw the arrival of huge spaces with 15,000 square foot dance floors, tough security, and assurances that there were no drugs or alcohol on the premises. In 1997, the Chicago Tribune explored the world of teen clubs, finding that teens as far away as Wisconsin and Iowa were driving into the Windy City for a night of fun. Back in 1990, a proposal for a club being ages 14 to 20 pissed off local parents, but fast forward to 1997 and this was the norm. Described the Tribune, although the over 21s can come to zero gravity, they'll find no alcohol there. Instead, they'll pay $1.25 for a soft drink or $2 for a virgin drink, such as non-alcoholic margaritas or pina coladas. The food, pizza, onion rings, fries, popcorn, and chicken wings, is free with the $11 door charge. And it keeps coming until the club closes at 4 a.m. Alcohol and drugs, as always, were a concern for parents, but the party culture of the 90s youth may have appeared wilder than what it really was. When looking at the entire decade, a 2000 CDC report noted drops in teen cocaine use, sex, suicidal thoughts, and carrying weapons, though alcoholic intake remained steady. What did rise? Smoking, tobacco, and weed. In 1991, 14.7% of youth said they smoked marijuana. That figure rose to 26.7% in 1999, while frequent cigarette use climbed from 12.7% in 1991 to 16.8% in 1999. However, overall, 90s kids and teens were drinking and smoking less than generations before them. The youth clubs and parties they congregated in and maybe smoked outside of were fun spaces away from school and parents to blow off steam before graduating to the young adult realm of bars and nightclubs. But politics, parties, and graduating into adulthood didn't appeal to everybody. Video game technology in the 90s was infinitely better than previous decades. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System released in America in 1991, the Sony PlayStation in 1994, and the Nintendo 64 in 1996. Some of the games available for these consoles brought a host of new problems and criticism, a continuation of past anxieties that gaming would cause children to grow into lazy or violent adults. So brand new graphics showcasing more realistic kicks, blood spatter, and decapitations caused some issues. Specifically, the publication of 1992's fighting game Mortal Kombat and the 1993 first-person shooter game Doom created debate about violence. To be clear, game players wanted the blood spatter and fatalities. The resulting popularity of the uncensored version, which outsold Nintendo's version almost 2-to-1, launched Sega into the market share lead. In total, over 6 to 7 million copies were sold within the first 6 months. During this era, there was no consistent video gamer rating system. In December 1993 and January 1994, Democratic Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl oversaw hearings on video game violence that basically went nowhere, though some stores, like Toys R Us, dropped a game they deemed too violent after the hearings. The game was Night Trap, in which, according to the New York Times, players try to prevent a gang of hooded vampires from capturing a group of scantily clad sorority sisters. If the player fails, the killers use a neck drilling device to drain the women's blood. Once this game was banned, this sparked video game developers and publishers into action. They formed a trade group and created the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB, which began rating games into 5 categories in 1994. This destroyed calls to make a federal regulatory body on video games, at least temporarily. Nintendo also began publishing the ultra-violent versions of new Mortal Kombat games once the rating system was in place. Still, a dislike and mistrust of video games and the people who played them would continue. Up in Littleton, Colorado, a suburb of Denver with roughly 40,000 people, one of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold's favorite games was Doom. In fact, Eric Harris, a Kansas-born military brat, modded the game and created custom levels in his spare time, sharing them on a private blog in which he also spilled about his violent fantasies and mischievous and increasingly cruel misdemeanor prank missions with Klebold and others. He, Dylan, and a wide circle of their friends were into computers, gaming, and the internet. Some of those friends wore long, black, and dramatic trench coats that earned them the moniker Trench Coat Mafia. But Klebold and Harris weren't true members of the informal group. The pair had met in middle school, but kindled a close relationship at Columbine High. In addition to working at a local pizza chain, the boys kept journals filled with violent plans to commit terrorist attacks, showcasing racism and homophobia, as well as severe mental illness. Later analysis by the FBI would deem Harris, an A student who once faked a suicide to a girl who had dumped him, as a psychopath, and Klebold, a slacker student whose pacifist Ohio State alum parents named him after the poet Dylan Thomas, was labeled depressed. They learned how to craft pipe bombs and, like most of the people in the area, collected and shot guns. Harris's father once found one of his son's pipe bombs and brushed the incident off. At the state-of-the-art Columbine High School, home to 1,945 students, the duo created 5 skits, one that included them as hired hitmen going around shooting bullies. Their friends from the Trenchcoat Mafia had starring roles. The boys also shot videotapes in their basements and in the wilderness, detailing their violence, revealing their racism, and making clear their instability. When Eric fell out with their friend Brooks Brown, he began crafting threats on his blog and specifically named Brown. According to Brooks, Dylan shared the web address with him so he could have a look. So Brooks Brown's parents found out about the threats and they report Eric Harris to the police. The police never file a drafted affidavit for a search warrant on Harris's home. So at this point, Eric stops posting alarming content to the website. In December 1997, Dylan writes a poem about being a bullet in a gun. On January 30th, 1998, the pair were arrested for stealing computer equipment from a van, earning them a slap on the wrist thanks to Eric's father's connections. On November 2nd, 1998, an 18-year-old friend named Robin Anderson, who'd later be Dylan's prom date, bought the boys weapons, including 2 shotguns, in a private sale at a gun show. 2 boys named Mark Maines and Philip Duran sold them a Tech 9. In late February, early March 1999, Dylan submitted a short story about a 6'4" left-handed man in a trench coat going on a shooting spree. Dylan himself was 6'4" and left-handed. His teacher was alarmed and informed his parents, but nothing happened. Eric turned 18 on April 9th. 9 days later, Dylan went to prom while Eric had a date. According to friends, they made plans for post-graduation and everything seemed fine. Well, apart from Eric being rejected from the Marines on April 15th because he was on Luvox, an antidepressant. On the morning of April 20th, the pair filmed a final basement tape, apologizing to their parents and the people they loved. By 11:15, they had placed 2 kerosene bombs hidden in duffel bags in Columbine's cafeteria and parked their bomb-strapped cars in the student parking lot. Harris had ran into Brooks Brown, who he had made up with some months ago, and Brooks asked Eric why he wasn't in class earlier. Eric said, "I like you now. Get out of here." Feeling nervous, Brooks left. Meanwhile, Harris and Klebold realized something was wrong. A diversionary bomb they had placed in a nearby meadow had gone off just fine. But 488 people were in the cafeteria for the first lunch period at 11:15 a.m., and those bombs hadn't detonated yet. So they threw a pipe bomb in the parking lot, and those nearby assumed it to be a senior prank. But then the boys started shooting by 11:19 a.m. The first fatality was a 17-year-old girl named Rachel Scott. Injuring several others, the pair's next victim as they ran into the school and down a hallway was a sophomore named Daniel Rarbaugh. They proceeded into the cafeteria but didn't shoot anyone, though there were multiple people inside. They went back to the entrance and shot at assembled officers by 11:26 a.m. Inside the cafeteria, science teacher Dave Sanders, along with 2 janitors, evacuated students to the 2nd floor and urged people in the library to stay where they were. As Dave Sanders tried to secure the area, he was shot twice and managed to make it to a science room with 31 people inside. At 11:29 a.m., Klebold and Harris then went upstairs to the school library, where 56 people were hidden inside, including 2 teachers and 2 librarians. Harris announced everybody with a white hat, aka a jock, was dead. Several students then hid their hats. The pair then murdered 12 people in the library and injured 10 within a span of 7 minutes. Dylan spotted a friend named John Savage, whom he allowed to flee. One victim, the only black boy in the room, a football player and senior named Isaiah Scholes, was singled out with epithets before being killed. One of the injured was a boy named Patrick Ireland, who had passed out after being shot 3 times, including twice in the head. Eric and Dylan left the library to wander around the school, firing shots, throwing pipe bombs and Molotovs, but most of the school had already been evacuated. Those who remained were hidden in the school's myriad enclosed hallways, classrooms, and closets. SWAT surrounded the school by 12 p.m. At 2:15, the students and teacher who were providing medical care to Dave Sanders put a sign in the window saying "bleeding to death," which was broadcast live. The police prevented medics to getting to Sanders as they swept the 250,000 square foot school to find the shooters, who they weren't sure were dead yet. Meanwhile, Patrick Ireland dragged himself, despite being paralyzed, to the window of the library, where at 2:38 p.m. on live television, he was seen being rescued. Dylan and Eric's bodies were found in the library at approximately 3:30 p.m. 188 total shots had been fired by the boys, most by Harris, who did nearly double more than Klebold. 15 people, including the murderers, were dead, though newspapers initially reported up to 25 had died. The Columbine massacre was not the first incidence of school violence, nor would it be the last, but it was the most premeditated and deadly school attack in the modern era, made worse by the fact that the perpetrators were not one but two teenage boys who then ended their lives afterward. Also, this is missing from a lot of people's recollections about Columbine. They also left 95 bombs around the crime scene, which weren't discovered in total for days after the event, and not told to the public until February 2000. That's one of the major misconceptions about Columbine. It wasn't just a school shooting, but a terrorist attack. Schools in the area remained closed as police investigated if there was a broader conspiracy. Per the Washington Post on April 23rd, other area schools reopened today with tightened security, and trench coats like the ones worn by the two gunmen were banned in Denver and 2 other Colorado school districts because they could be used to hide weapons. The night before the massacre, Mark Maines bought the boys 100 rounds of ammo at Kmart for $100. He and Philip Duran would get 9 years and 4.5 years respectively for their role in selling the underage killers a gun, which was illegal. Their friend Robin Anderson, meanwhile, got off scot-free because of the gun show loophole, which didn't require background checks for guns bought in private sales at gun shows. The loophole was closed by state law in Colorado and Oregon in November 2000. The police withheld information about the previous search warrant affidavit that was drafted but never filed, and were roundly criticized when this became knowledge. Dylan's mother, Sue, insisted that her son would have never participated in the massacre for 6 months afterwards, until she was shown the basement tapes. Speaking of those tapes, Time magazine reported on them before victims' families had been notified about them. All of the boys' behavior in the preceding months and years were analyzed and heavily broadcast, and a clear pattern of danger, corruption, negligence, and influences emerged. Multiple former friends volunteered to offer stories about the boys to the press, from a mixed girl insisting that the Nazi-obsessed pair weren't racist, to a girl telling New York Times Eric was her best friend while telling Inside Edition she wasn't really close with them. The victims' families were in a heavy daze of grief and invasive coverage, and arguments over memorials raged when a group put up 15 memorial markers, including for Dylan and Eric. Daniel Rarbaugh's father tore them down. Isaiah Scholl's family complained that they had long brought up troubling racism to school staff, which hadn't been addressed. Here's a 1999 interview featuring Isaiah's father being told about his son's final moments.
And Isaiah did kind of look, he was a buff little kid, and he looked like a jock. He was well built. And they walked by and they saw Isaiah, and one of them said to the other one, they said there's a N-word over here. And the other kid came over and saw him, and Isaiah tried to back up. Isaiah didn't say anything. And they shot Isaiah. And then they shot my friend Matt also.
And then you played dead, Craig.
Yeah, I just ended up laying on the floor. I was praying to God to give me courage and to keep protection over us, and he told me to get out of there. He told me God told me to get out of there.
Meanwhile, scores of people claimed Dylan and Eric had been bullied. In the months of coverage that followed, bullying in schools was put into a national spotlight. The media incorrectly said the boys were in the group of quirky outcasts called the Trenchcoat Mafia. And then several observers pointed out that the pair had lots of friends and healthy social lives, with Eric Harris even being a member of the soccer team. Wrote Eric in one of his journal entries, "It's my fault. Not my parents, not my brothers, not my friends, not my favorite bands, not computer games, not the media. It is mine. God damn it, do not blame anyone else besides me and Dylan for this. Don't blame my family. They had no clue, and there's nothing they could have done. They brought me up just fucking fine. Don't blame the school. The administration is doing a fine job." The victims and their families didn't agree, and 30 families would receive a total $2.5 million from the families of Harris, Klebold, Maine, and Duran. Isaiah Scholl's family accepted a separate $350,000 settlement in a suit in which they had sought $250 million from the 4 families for failing to supervise their children. Dylan and Eric's interest in video games renewed hostility towards the medium. Then rumor got out that the boys and the Trenchcoat Mafia were huge Marilyn Manson fans and goths, which wasn't true. The goth subculture received extensive press in the wake of the attack.
Find beauty in graveyards and beauty in like dark dress and dark movies and dark books.
They like to live on the fringe of society, wearing dark makeup and clothes, listening to alternative music like Marilyn Manson. They are known as gothics or goths, but in the wake of the massacre in Columbine High, this underground youth movement is being viewed as something much more than just a fashion statement. Several school districts in the Denver area are banning students from wearing goth-like trench coats, and kids told us that police are rounding up some gothic teens. This young man's friend was brought in for questioning.
One of my friends gets arrested off the street for wearing a black trench coat, walking down the street for doing nothing wrong.
So far, there is no proof the 2 suspects in the Columbine High massacre, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, considered themselves gothics. But there are striking similarities. The suspects were reportedly into the music of goth rocker Marilyn Manson, who has described himself as a satanic priest and an outsider.
Said Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, they are able to hook into the internet and play video games that are extraordinarily violent. Games that cause people to be killed and the players to die themselves. They're able to get into the internet chat rooms, and if there are no nuts or people of the same mentality in their hometown, hook up with people around the country. They are able to rent from the video store, not just go down and see Natural Born Killers or the Basketball Diaries, but they are able to bring it home and watch it repeatedly. In music, there is Marilyn Manson, an individual who chooses the name of a mass murderer as part of his name. The lyrics of his music are consistent with his choice of name. Marilyn Manson, a band made up of multiple people and the lead singer of the same name, were peaking in popularity in the late 90s, especially after their 1998 song, The Dope Show. To his credit, Marilyn Manson cloaked the political hypocrisy in a 1999 Rolling Stone op-ed. He wrote, "Even if they were fans, that gives them no excuse, nor does it mean that music is to blame. Did we look for James Huberty's inspiration when he gunned down people at McDonald's? What did Timothy McVeigh like to watch? What about David Koresh, Jim Jones? Do you think entertainment inspired Kip Kinkle? Or should we blame the fact that his father bought him the guns he used in the Springfield, Oregon murders? Isn't killing just killing, regardless of if it's in Vietnam or Jonesboro, Arkansas?" That last one was a reference to the 1998 West Side Middle School shooting, in which 2 boys named Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden, ages 13 and 11, murdered 5 people, 4 students and a teacher, before being arrested. They got out at the age of 21. Both Columbine and Jonesboro and Kip Kinkle, who we discuss in I Love the 90s True Crime, strengthened calls for gun reform, along with several incidents we discuss in episode 6 of this series. But even survivors of Columbine and people who lived in similar regions of low-populated areas surrounded by wilderness and steeped in gun culture were divided on gun reform. Answered one Columbine survivor when asked how many guns his family kept in the home. How many? Probably 6 or 7. I could run around and start shooting people easily, but it's morals. You just know right from wrong. My parents have trained me with guns. The number of homicides committed by youth in America dropped by 68% between 1993 and 1999, and youth crime was at its lowest in 25 years. But the terrorism of 2 white suburban teenagers signaled that all wasn't well, leaving an irreversible mark on American culture. They had shown endless red flags, but due to their white privilege and the permissive gun culture of Colorado, nothing was done. Despite loving households, good grades, therapy, good schooling, and every other manner of middle-class life, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were dangerous ticking time bombs. As a result of the Columbine massacre, there was a new examination of the nihilism of the white male at the end of history, exhibited in films like Fight Club, which was allegedly delayed to a fall release after the massacre. Wrote film critic Hulk, Suddenly, we had a generation of mostly young white boys who felt soft and coddled, so what they craved became the hardships sold to them by movies. Kmart, which faced heavy criticism, stopped selling gun ammo in 2001, and school safety drills also incorporated shooting scenarios.
4 months passed before Columbine students returned to their school. They turned it into a celebration. Ireland was there.
When Columbine High reopened in fall 1999 after undergoing millions in renovations, there were changes, including a new library. Recalled Columbine principal Frank DeAngelis, "We could not serve Chinese food because that was the meal the kids were eating when the shooting started. Teachers had to change the curriculum. They couldn't show a World War II movie because of the sound of gunfire. Doors slammed, kids would have meltdowns." Columbine forced many people to reckon with the realities of teenage life in an attempt to make sense of what had happened. Because classism and otherness is a frequent component of bullying, clothes were a target of reform in the 90s. In the late 80s, a few public schools had implemented uniforms, but Long Beach Unified School District became the first district to require them in 1994, saying it was an anti-gang measure. Across the country, school dress codes were being augmented to stop the proliferation of gang colors, address class inequalities, and control the outfit choices of teen girls. Clinton was a major advocate of school uniforms, saying in 1996, "If it means that teenagers will stop killing each other over designer jackets, then our public schools should be able to require their students to wear school uniforms." After Columbine, multiple schools banned the wearing of trench coats or proposed it. For more on style in the 1990s, check out the next episode of I Love the 90s. Uniforms could also be a good thing for children from troubled backgrounds. The homelessness problem that quickened under Ronald Reagan didn't go away in the 90s, impacting children and teens, including those aging out of the foster system. In 1991, Congress allocated $7.2 million to homeless children, which was tripled in 1992. Remember, this was the era of recession. The next year, a report found that roughly 225,000 to 500,000 children were homeless on any given night, prompting an education nonprofit to address ways teachers could handle homeless students at the door, offering 13 tips for handling the physiological and psychological effects of homelessness that cause a student's grades to suffer. Wrote George E. Paulus, "Remember that homeless children and youth didn't create the unfortunate situation they are in, nor can they participate in the political process to alleviate it. They need all the support, love, and consideration they can get." So it's unsurprising that in the mid to late 90s, new avenues for underage workers were opened, from being able to operate motor vehicles to dealing with certain industrial machines. Additionally, children worked in large numbers in agriculture, since it was never excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act. A Rutgers economist found that in 1996 alone, approximately 292,000 children, 2/3 of them under 15, worked unlawfully, saving their employers roughly $155 million in unpaid hours or hiring adult workers. Wrote the LA Times, "Not all those children, more than 2 boys to every girl, are living a nightmare. Some are teenagers selling burgers and fries at the mall for more hours than the law allows. Others, though, toil in jobs too dangerous for their years or work during the very school hours designed to give them a chance at a future." What about when a child's future was compromised from the start? In 1989, Elisa Izquierdo was born in Brooklyn, New York to Awilda Lopez, a crack user. Custody was given to her father, Gustavo, who was a great caretaker but in failing health. Awilda was given unsupervised weekend custody rights in 1991, and for the next 2 years, she would beat Elisa mercilessly, causing the school and her father to complain to the courts, but nothing was done. When Gustavo died in 1993 of lung cancer, Elisa's mother was given full custody the following year, despite her teachers objecting. Elisa was moved from a private school to a public one, where numerous teachers noted bruises, and in December 1994, Awilda, who was back on crack, withdrew her from school. The things this child endured are too many and gruesome to name, but the abuse was mental, physical, and sexual. On November 15, 1995, Awilda threw Elisa headfirst into a concrete wall, killing her. The child welfare system of New York was brought under the spotlight in the aftermath, with observers pointing out that multiple neighbors and teachers had tried to get Elisa taken away from her mother. Not only had child abuse reports risen after 1988, but the budgets for caseworkers had fallen. Giuliani ordered a review of the child welfare system, leading to the Administration for Children's Services. At the state level in 1996, Elisa's law was created to have more stringent public reports of abuse complaints and social workers' responses to them. In case you're wondering, Awilda Lopez appeared on an episode of The Rolanda Watts Show, attempted to harm herself, and was sentenced to life, but paroled out in 2022. We'll be coming back to motherhood in the next episode of this series, but Elisa's story was crucial to highlight because the public outrage about the abuse and the reporting of it by teachers meant that the rights of children, which had been growing since the 70s as we've tracked, was of continued importance. But obviously, there were disagreements about when intervention was necessary. For instance, in 1994, a 35-year-old Georgia woman named Lynn Keevy slapped her 9-year-old son in a Woodstock Winn-Dixie and got slapped with a felony charge of cruelty to children and faced with a $22,050 bail when an employee called the police. At the time, in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Austria, it was illegal to spank or strike children. So in America, the issue of child beating came down to parental rights. Complained social welfare professor and anti-corporal punishment activist Adrian A. Hauser. Violence starts with physical abuse at home. Way less parents were spanking, but they disagreed with court interference in private matters, with 67% saying in a USA Today poll that sometimes a good hard spanking was necessary, down from 84% in 1986. The charges against Lynn Keevy were ultimately dropped, but not after national media attention and a new understanding that what was generally permitted 20 years prior was no longer generally permitted in the 90s, and you could land in hot water. Cue to many a 90s child being told in somebody's store through clenched teeth, "I'ma beat your ass when we get home." By the way, Lynn started and dropped a lawsuit against the police and turned down $1,000 from the National Enquirer for a photo of her kissing her son in front of the Winn-Dixie she slapped him in. The 90s. Let's cap this whirlwind of information with a return to the Spur Posse, those all-American suburban teenage boys who competed for points by having sex, not always consensually. Said one member to Joan Didion, "I'm glad to see girls get more authority in the world, but it's like they already got enough authority when it comes to you-know." Didion noted he made a thrusting motion with his butter knife before finishing. Girls are like, I don't know. They're gonna start getting up their courage in a couple of years and going head to head with the guys, fighting them and shit. And girls are gonna have to get knocked out. That's how it's gonna be. These attitudes didn't pop up out of nowhere. Added a parent, morals have changed, girls have changed. It used to be girls would want to be married at 18 or 19, and they keep their sights on having a home and love and a family. Global issues, class issues, race issues, youth issues. How did these various intersections converge with misogyny to impact the people expected to fall in love, get married, and birth the next generation, regardless of how they felt about it? Morals have changed. Girls are gonna have to get knocked out. That's how it's gonna be. That's right. In the next episode of Lexual Does the 90s, it's time to discuss American women. You won't want to miss it. If you're enjoying this series, make sure you become a patron for early access, sources, and extra content. Check out the free companion series, I Love the 90s, featuring deep dives on 90s Christmas, food history, true crime, and more upcoming topics. For $25 and up a month, you get listed in the credits of every 90s related episode and cool limited edition merchandise. For $10 and up a month, you get listed listed in the credits of I Love the 90s. For $5 a month, you get access to the exclusive companion series Deep Cuts, which focuses on regional history that'll take you even further into the 90s. In the latest Deep Cut, we'll be talking about Black LA history, including Black middle class values, representation, the politics of Black TV shows, the flourishing Black literature scene, and Moesha, the first female Black teen idol. It's gonna be juicy. And in the next Deep Cut coming next month, we'll be talking about Charlotte, North Carolina, my hometown, the city that made me and led to these history retrospectives that hopefully you are liking and enjoying. So with that being said, I hope you like, I hope you leave a comment, I hope you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.